Hey everyone, welcome back to another Pod to Profit episode. I'm Liz.
And I'm Abby.
And today we're going to talk about brainstorming your podcast content tree. So what does that mean? That means, so we've already covered goal setting, we've talked about hiring it out, DIY. Now it's time to actually brainstorm your podcast episodes using a framework so that you actually have a plan. Now, keep in mind, you might suddenly, oh my gosh, it's the week of Thanksgiving. I should throw in a relevant episode. Or, you always want to keep things fresh, spicy, whatever your audience is asking for. So allowing a little bit of wiggle room, but really having that stable plan for what your episodes are going to be about.
So I came up with this content tree idea actually way before we even had the idea for Pod to Profit, which is crazy. So it's fun that this is finding a home somewhere, and I'm really excited that we're going to dive into it. It's like I never thought this would see the light of day. I'm so excited.
So I think it's so important to have a consistent strategy because it keeps you from feeling burnt out. If everything is an emergency, then nothing is important. And so it's like if you in the back of your mind, now once you get better at it and more experienced and just a little bit more under your belt, it doesn't stress me out as much. But sometimes, I've never once been like, what is this episode going to be about? Or is it too early or this or that? But it just really helps you align your podcast with your overall goals, and it makes sure that your content stays relevant to what your audience wants to hear about. So a content tree framework, basically it's a simple way to brainstorm and organize the podcast topics for whether it's a month, 6 months, an entire year, whatever it might be.
So the content tree that is downloadable in the show notes below, this one is set up for a year. So 12 months, standard year, you can start it anytime. It's not like you have to start it January 1st. Like whenever your year starts for your podcast, this will help set up the next 12 months of success for you.
And this is the system that I use to map out my podcast topics for Flower Farmer Forum and Back to Better.
So let's start your content tree with the trunk of it. What is the overall theme of your podcast? So for you, Flower Farmer Forum, it's flower farming and how to run a successful flower farm. Looking at some of my other clients that I work with the Love Story podcast. So the initial idea for that one is just sharing love stories and how did people fall in love? What does that journey look like? So just figuring out what is that primary niche or focus that your podcast has.
And those episodes need to tie back to your podcast goals.
So then from your trunk, you can start to grow up and start to branch out. Now, I have it set up so you have 12 monthly topics. You don't necessarily need to have a monthly theme, but this will help you outline so that you can then maybe shuffle them around. You have the ideas on hand. So these are the broad themes that fall under your overall niche. So for Flower Farmer Forum, you have different things that happen in different months of the year. So you can kind of break it down a little bit that way.
Yeah. So I do episodes, should you grow this? I have a series there where we really break down whether or not it makes sense, whether or not it's profitable. And those are typically every 3 episodes. So I try to follow a pattern of, but it also has changed and evolved a lot. Mm-hmm. So if you go through and look back at where my episodes were a year from now compared to now, it's because I'm getting more feedback. But when I was first starting out, it's really, really good to have this content tree. So, in January, okay, let's talk about seed planning. What all of the planning stages. Okay, February, let's talk about what this garden is going to be, just having a theme essentially for every single month.
For the Love Story podcast, kind of what we're doing with the broader topics for the 12. February, we're going to be doing some teenage love story podcasts like Puppy Love. You were a guest on it, so finding love after you've had a first love. So we're doing kind of some of those where it's a month of okay, what's your first love story? What's your second love story? And those are just kind of the big 12 topics that we can then break it down even further from. So then you're going to want to assign those topics to a month if that's what you decide to do. Again, you can shuffle things up, but assign that to the month, and then you're going to break down these 12 topics into weekly subtopics, and those will be your podcast episodes.
Yeah, so then, what are the topics with relevant seasons? So right now it's December. All of my podcast episodes for my business podcast, Flower Farmer Forum, the business of running a flower farm, So right now they're focusing on goal setting, right? Because those episodes that are coming out late December, early January, it's all about goal setting and planning for next year because we're in the off season. I can talk about tax tips in like February and March because you don't want to wait till April to throw those out there. September, I'll start talking about holiday prep, whatever it might be. Just planning ahead when you record that content. If you're like me and you're recording a couple months ahead of time, you're always preparing and just make it relevant to what that season of time is going to be.
So when you have your big topics, you break down into the weekly subtopics. So let's say that we do a theme on building better habits. So that's your overall monthly theme. Week 1, you're going to do one on understanding your triggers. Week 2, you'll do small actionable changes. Week 3, it'll be about staying consistent. And week 4, it's an episode on tracking your progress. So you take your 1 of 12 themes and break it down into 4 more that are relevant to that.
All right, let's share a little bit example of how that content tree really comes into practice. So I will assign those topics and then I choose those themes based on what I want them to, how to expand on those basically. So a tip for batching that content is I will write the episodes for an entire month all at once. And I keep notes for inspiration in my Google Sheets. So it's actually called social media schedule, is something that Abby and I share back and forth. And I just have a whole list of ideas for topics and then I break it down. Now, I used to sometimes just record a really long episode and sometimes that would go into like parts 1 and parts 2. But now that I've gotten better at it, I'll write 4 outlines at once so that it can really just sit there and record them all at once. Start fresh, start new, a little bit of longer time, but then you don't have to worry about so much content every single time.
Exactly. And on my end, it helps tremendously knowing like, hey, this is the monthly topic. Here's what it's being broken down as. Here's all of the content, or here's when I'm going to be recording the content. So then I know as the editor, producer, when to look for and what I'm looking for.
Exactly. And your audience is craving that little bit of familiarity. So right now for Flower Farmer Forum, I'm really planning out my entire 2025, what that's going to look like, because you guys know that. So I have a flower farm and then I have a podcast and coaching business about flower farming. So right now, and their busy seasons are opposites, but I really need to do everything I can with the podcast and the coaching right now through like the end of January to just hit the podcast and coaching hard through the end of the year, because my flower farm itself, come March, it's going to get really busy. I've still got a lot of things going on right now. I'm meeting with brides, but I'm building a new venue and workspace on my farm. And so my businesses just take turns. And I think that, they complement each other. They're sister businesses, but sometimes they're twins, sometimes they're cousins. I don't know how else to describe it. But everything that I teach my flower farmers to get better, I'm practicing on myself in real life. So like we have a weekly progress project or whatever it might be. And so I'm able to do both at once. But like this tree for my podcast, it needs to happen. I'm going to have, by the end of 2024, I'm going to have 52 topics for 2025. And it's not going to work if I keep doing what I'm doing right now. It's working okay, but to have a plan in place, it just needs to be able to rinse and repeat.
52 topics seems like a scary number when it's coming out of your mouth right here, right now, but
it's 12 topics.
It's really 12 topics, and everything gets really boiled down into the 52. So what if you're sitting there and you're going, well, I have my overall theme, but I can't think of 12 topics. What do you do? So first thing you can do is talk to that audience that you have. You have a following on social media. You throw out a post saying, hey, do you guys want to know more about this, this, or this? You can throw out an Instagram poll in your stories. You can put an open-ended response in your stories. You can put a post on Facebook and say, tell me what you want to know more about that I'm an expert in.
Exactly. And just when it comes to recording, when these episodes are similar, it just goes so much smoother. Mm-hmm. The Should You Grow This series that I put out on my podcast, it's just easier if I do 2 or 3 of them at once, and then I'm in that routine, I'm in that habit. I'm not reinventing the wheel every single time, because it takes a little bit of time to like get into your groove.
Another thing you can do if you're like, I can't think of 12 topics, that seems like a lot, look at social media trends. What is going on that in your field that you could dive deeper into and teach your audience more about.
Exactly. And keep some wiggle room. You never know when you're going to need to, slip something else in once in a while. Some months have 5 weeks instead of 4. So having that little extra wiggle room, but just, assigning them to a calendar. So every month is going to have a topic. Break them down into weekly subtopics. Use your content tree to stay organized, consistent, and align with your overall podcast goals.
And download the content tree. Like a lot of this, I feel like we're explaining it, but it's a very visual thing. So be sure you head down to the show notes and download that free content tree worksheet. It is there for you to use and develop all your content.